Hi, Jake. Thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm grand, thanks, Ethan. How's yourself?
I'm fine, thank you. It's a privilege to have you on. I'm a big fan of yourself and Stiff Little Fingers, so it's great to get to speak
Thank
to
you.
you.
Thanks very much.
I like to go back to the start with my guests. What was life like for you growing up in Northern Ireland?
That's always a question that gets asked, and it's a difficult one to answer because you don't have anything to compare it to. Do you know what I mean? It was normal because it was the same life that everybody else I knew was living. You know what I mean? So uh, yeah, I mean, obviously, looking back on it, you realize that what became known as the Troubles started when I was 11 years old. So I don't have a huge number of memories of it not being there. But I guess it's like anything. You adapt to these things, and because it was normal for everybody I knew, it didn't seem out of the ordinary to me. It was only actually when you moved away and you realized how much it actually impacted your everyday life. You realized, what a strange and difficult situation it was.
Did you get out of there much, or was it only when you went on tour that you first got out of there?
No, we didn't. We didn't. Again, you've got to remember. Like I said, I was 11 when the whole thing started, and that was 1969. We're going way back. So people popping over to the Costa Brava for 2 weeks in the summer just didn't happen. I remember the first kid in our class, and I must have been about 14 at the time, and he went to Mallorca this shows you how much I can remember, because of how out of the ordinary it was. He went to Mallorca for 2 weeks during the summer holidays. And first of all, he came back totally brown, and we were all amazed. We'd never seen anybody with a suntan like that. But also the fact that you've been on a plane, you went to where? You may as well have said he'd gone to the moon for all we were concerned. I mean, occasionally, we had family that lived in Barrow and Furness, and so occasionally our if we got a summer holiday at all, it would be like 2 weeks in the lakes. So which is probably why it's still one of my favorite places on the planet. I love the Lake District, just I think probably because of that.
Well, Northern Ireland did have a massive impact on the band and your songwriting as well, didn't it?
Well, certainly in the early days, yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those things. When you're at school and you're sort of being taught these things, and our English teacher, I remember when you had to do composition and that kind of thing. The his big mantra was always write about what you know, and so I guess that was that made it kind of obvious what to write about. But again, having said that, I mean, until we met Gordon Ogilvy and Colin McClelland, who were our first managers, I'd already started writing songs, obviously, at that point. And I'd only written one that was directly about the situation in Northern Ireland, and that was State of Emergency. I mean, I'd written other songs. I mean, I'd written Breakout as well at that point, and that was also right about what you know, because that was about being stuck in a pretty much a dead end job. So it actually took once I'd written State of Emergency, we kind of felt that was it. That was as much as we needed to say about what was going on there. And I think it took an outsider. Gordon was originally from Southport. It took an outsider to basically come in and say, no, you haven't even. Not only have you not finished writing about this, you haven't even scratched the surface of it. So that's when he and I started writing songs together, pretty much. I mean, he gave me what became the Suspect device. I mean, it was much longer when he gave it to me. He had a lot more. I seem to remember there were a lot more verses, but we had to cut it down to trim it to actually get it to fit a song. And I mean, that also was like I've often referred to it as lighting a blue touch paper, because it was a bit like that. It kind of not necessarily inspired me, but kind of, I guess, opened the door for, yeah, he's right. There's a lot more to be said here.
The thing is, as well, with your songs, obviously the about what you know, where you're growing up and stuff. But like Alternative Ulster, for instance, where he says there's nothing for us in Belfast,
Well,
people all over the world are probably thinking the same about the place they're living. So even though
right.
you're writing about your place, it's still universal in a way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting that you picked up on that because and a lot of people lump that song in with sort of the Irish songs, if you like. And I mean, it's a thing that's always made me smile because everybody refers to Inflammable Material as that's the album they wrote about growing up in Northern Ireland. I think there are 13 songs on there, and only six of them are directly about Northern Ireland, so not even half. And an alternative Ulster is an interesting one from that point of view because you're right. I mean, it's basically a boredom song. I mean, it's effectively the Buzzcocks' boredom just rewritten in Northern Ireland, and that opening line is the main clue to it. Is there's nothing for us in Belfast? It could just as easily be there's nothing for us in Manchester, Newcastle, Liverpool, whatever, and the only sort of clue to its setting is the second verse, which of course brings in the reality of having the army on the street and the police force being slightly more repressive than they probably a lot more repressive than they would have been in the cities I previously mentioned.
Well, I think that's one of the greatest punk songs ever, Alternative Ulster. Is that the song that the fans always like still go crazy for now?
I mean, it's certainly the best known song. For all that it was never actually a hit. I mean, obviously, to be fair, we never really had much in the way of singles success anyway. I mean, luckily, and I say luckily, we were seen more as an albums band because I think that gives you more of a lifespan. But yeah, I mean, I've often said that it's a bit like having I'm showing my colours here. It's a bit like having Alan Shearer on the substitutes bench. It's like if you're playing a show and it's not going well, and you look at the set list because I've always got the set list down at my feet, and you look at the set list and see Alternative Ulster's next. It's a bit like, oh yeah, well we'll send the boy Shearer on, see if he can get us a goal, and if it doesn't work, you're screwed because that's your star player right there.
uh, so with the first album,
Hmm.
you like that was punk as well because you did all that yourself, didn't you? Getting it out there, is that right? Or was that the first single?
No, the first single we did all ourselves. No, the first album was a collaboration with Rough Trade. Although, having said that, that was also their first album as well. They hadn't made an album, and in fact, that was exactly how they approached us with it. We did the first single completely on our own. I mean, Gordon came up with the idea of let's just make a record, and we're like, can we do that? And he was like, hell yeah! He said, everybody's doing it. It's punk rock, mate. Everybody's doing it. So we recorded that in a local radio jingle station studio rather, and John Peel heard it and started playing it, and that kind of was the first springboard to people knowing who we were outside of Northern Ireland, and Rough Trade were selling the single. I mean, we used to send it across on the back of a bread van and things like that. We had no distribution whatsoever. It was very, very much do it yourself. And Rough Trade then subsequently put out Alternative Ulster as a Rough Trade single for us when we were coming over to tour with Tom Robinson. And at the end of that tour, we were convinced we'd get a record deal, and we didn't. Nobody was interested. And so, again, Rough Trade, bless them, stepped into the breach and said, look, we think there's an album's worth there. We've never made an album. You've never made an album. Let's make an album. And so we did. And the other astonishing thing about the deal, such as it was with Rough Trade, I mean, we never signed anything. It was all done on a handshake. And they basically said, look, we've never made an album before, so how about when we cover the recording costs, we'll split the profit with you 50-50. And at the time, we didn't think there'd be any profit. But, you try getting that deal out of Warner Brothers and see how far you get.
Yeah.
And, of course, the record was a hit, which nobody saw coming. And that put us in a very strong position then going forward because then record labels, they all wanted to sign us then. I mean, nobody was interested before that record, but afterwards we had people queuing up. And it was an interesting insight into how the record business at that time worked because they basically all queued up and started offering us money. And we're like, well, we just had a hit record and Rough Trade have given us half the profit, so we don't actually need money. And so they were like, well, what do you want? And so we thought about it and we said, we want complete control over everything we do, which was a double-edged sword because, I mean, only Chrysalis actually gave it to us. And in so much as we said, we'll make the records, you sell them, You get no input unless we ask for it. And also, you don't own the record. That was another. I don't know who came up with that genius idea. I think it was Gordon. So basically, much like the two-tone thing, we didn't sign the band to the label. We did a tape lease deal with the label. So after 10 years, we got the records back, and then we could sell them again to them, which we did. But like I said, I say it was a double-edged sword because while we had this independence and this, complete control, which, felt very cool at the time, we also realized that it meant that the record label weren't as invested in us. So while they were making videos for Ultravox or whoever, and I'm not knocking any of these bands, it's just they were signed to the label and they got the auspices and all the all the facilities that the label could give them. We kind of got left to our own devices a bit, and I think we got left behind because of that, and that was really our own fault. We probably should have been a bit more welcoming. In all the time that we were on the label, I didn't even know we had an A&R guy. And he's the guy that's supposed to be in the studio when you're making the record and helping you and saying, yeah, I think that's great. Or how about you put another guitar on there? And we just didn't want that extra voice in there. We already had our own 4 voices and we were bringing in a producer, and also we had Gordon usually in there as well. So we already had like 6 voices shouting. The last thing we needed, or we thought we needed, was somebody from the record label. But of course, what you get if you've got somebody from the record label there is you get somebody invested in the actual record because they were there while you were making it. And it was only, I'm not making this up, it was only when we were pretty much splitting up that I met the guy who actually said to me, he said, I actually said to him, Steve, what do you actually do here? And I said, I know you're in the A&R department, but, does that mean you go out and sign bands and stuff? He said, well, it's artist and repertoire, which basically means I look after the development of acts. He said, in fact, I'm your A&R guy. I went, really? I had no fucking idea. And bizarrely, I now live in a tiny, tiny, tiny little town in West Virginia. And that same guy, Steve, has bought a piece of land literally 20 miles up the road from me. So the one guy at the record label I didn't even really know has now got property 20 miles from where I live in the middle of fucking nowhere.
That's crazy as well, though, with Inflammable Material, how that got in the top 20, the first indie album to do that. Can you remember it getting into the charts?
I do, because it pretty much it coincided with my 21st birthday. So, when people say to you, what do you want for your birthday? I went, you go a ways to beat that fucking present, I tell you, Yeah, we were stunned by it. And it didn't feel real, it really didn't feel real. We were literally going to record shops and because in those days, certain record stores would have the BBC chart, up on the wall, because they'd have the albums then in order on a rack. And we'd go in and just stare at it. It was like sort of highest new entry. I think it went in one place above the best of Barry Manilow, which was fucking just, what? That doesn't make sense, because we were still 4 raggedy ass kids from Belfast. It just didn't compute with us at all. And it was surreal, I think is probably the best word, because the other thing was nothing had changed. Do you know what I mean? When you're a kid and you're watching Top of the Pops and stuff, you have this weird idea that, if you're part of all that, that somehow you're going to be like, it's going to be like the Monkees. You're all going to live in this big wacky house somewhere, or your life's going to change. And it fucking didn't. It was exactly the same, you still went to the same pub, you still went to the same chip shop, and nothing had fucking changed. And I think also a lot of that was to do with the fact we didn't have any photographs of ourselves on the record. So, suddenly you're walking down the street going, I got the highest new entry in the album chart. Why does nobody know who the fuck I am? But again, that actually turned out to be a blessing, because it kind of meant that you could still live your own life and keep your fucking feet on the ground, because I knew other people who were in bands who actually weren't even as successful as we were, who disappeared up their own ass very, very quickly. So, I think we've been very, very lucky with the way our career progressed, for a number of reasons. One, because we've been successful enough that it's been a career, and for that we're hugely grateful. We got to do what we all dreamt of doing when we were teenagers, and I'm 67 years old and I'm still doing it. And you can't underestimate how much that means to somebody. But I think also because we managed to stay grounded, we never got. And I'm not saying that the guys in U2 aren't grounded. I mean, I knew them when they were starting out, and they were all lovely, lovely, lovely guys. And I'm sure that they're still the same people they were in that respect. But it must be very difficult for them, as I just said, to go to the same pub or the same chip shop. Just simply because of the amount of fame that they garnered.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying there. You know, with it going into the charts, though, how did that happen? Like these days, you could use social media if you're an independent band and stuff, but how did it work back then? Is it just word of mouth?
I guess so. And yeah, and obviously we sold the records. People bought the record. I mean, I remember again, sort of the night before the chart was announced. Richard Scott, who was one half of Rough Trade's sort of main team, Jeff Travis being the other half, came up to see us. We were playing in York at a place called the Pop Club. And he came up to see us, and we thought that's a bit odd. The guy who kind of runs. Well, it wasn't. We didn't even consider it a record label at the time. It was basically a record shop. But the guy who's in charge is why is he coming up to this show? I mean, we're going to get a lot closer to London. Why come all the way up to York? And he looked slightly shell shocked and said, "We believe the record's going to be in the album chart tomorrow." And he kind of wanted to be there when that happened. So yeah, it was like I said, it was very, very, very strange. But I mean, basically, it was down to it sold and it kept selling, to the point that I mean, you said, how did it happen? And at the time, the charts were monitored by a thing called the British Market Research Bureau, who no longer do it. I don't know who does it these days, if anybody does. But then it was the British Market Research Bureau, who they used to do things like exit polls at elections and stuff like that. And, they were the people that would come up to you outside a supermarket with two brands of washing powder and go, which one do you prefer? All that's right. They did all that stuff, but they also did the chart. And anyway, they didn't know who the fuck Stiff Little Fingers were, and they certainly didn't know who Rough Trade Records were. And suddenly we were outselling everybody, in that particular week, hence the highest new entry. And we heard that it sold even more the following week and should have gone up. But because the BMRB didn't believe, they started to think this was a fix. This was the story we were told. So it actually dropped to the following week. I think it was 14, then it dropped to 18. And then when it kept selling into the third week, the BMRB had to go, no, this actually seems to be real. So it crawled back up again. And it actually hung about in the chart for a hell of a long time. I'm not sure exactly how long. I know in the NME chart, which isn't, as tight or wasn't as tight a barometer as the official chart, it was in that chart for over a year. We're starting to think this has turned into fucking Dark Side of the Moon or something, this record. It just keeps going, And it still sells to this day, which is astonishing. It's astonishing.
It is a brilliant debut album, and I'm sure you wasn't expecting that reaction, but did that add more pressure going into the second album?
Kind of did, yeah. Because also, again, I talked about how we signed with Chrysalis, and that brought its own pressure as well. There's a fantastic line on a song on the second Undertones record. The song's called more songs about chocolate and girls, which of course they were famously critiqued as sort of they write songs about chocolate and girls, much as we always write songs about political misery or whatever. And anyway, the line is here's more songs about chocolate and girls, a lot less time but a lot more care. And that's true, because for your first record, you've got your whole life to write it. I mean, there's no pressure on you. Nobody's pushing you to finish it. But once you've signed with a major label, which, both ourselves and the Undertones had done, you no sooner give them the first record than they're already plotting the next one. And you've got to go away and write the damn thing and record it. So there was, and also because, Inflammable Material was such a shock to the system, I guess. I mean, it got stellar reviews pretty much everywhere. It did incredibly well commercially. Not that, again, we didn't see that bit coming. In fact, we didn't even see the reviews coming. In a way, Nobody's Heroes was bound to be a bit of a disappointment, no matter what we did, you know. But we didn't see it like that. But we were put under the cosh to go and record it. And it was actually recorded in two halves because we didn't have the songs, but we wanted to be seen to be doing something. So we recorded, I think, the first half of it in November 79 and the second half in early January 1980. And it came out February, March time. So it was a very, very quick turnaround. But it was recorded in two halves. And I think with the exception of maybe one song, it was recorded exactly the way you hear it. So what is side one was recorded in November 79, with the exception, I think, of Fly the Flag, which wasn't written and recorded until January the following year. And I can't remember which song is on side two that we had recorded previously. But pretty much what you hear is that. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of feels there's a little bit of progress musically being made. I mean, we're playing a little bit better. The production's obviously a little bit better. But it is very, in my mind anyway, it's very much son of Inflammable Material. It's just, the songs just aren't as good. I mean, some of them, there's still some good songs. Gotta Get Away, Fly the Flag, Tin Soldiers are all good songs. But, as a consistent piece of work, I don't think it holds up as well as Inflammable Material does.
It is a good second album, but it's not as raw as the debut album, is it? It's not as in
Well,
your
no, but
face.
that like I said, we by this stage, we'd moved out of. I mean, we recorded Inflammable Material in the basement of a terraced house in Cambridge. There was a tiny, tiny little studio called Spaceward. I mean, very cramped. We were all shoved into basically, a space that was no bigger than my mum's front room. And we recorded it pretty much live, which we did also with Nobody's Heroes. But for Nobody's Heroes, we were in Olympic Studios in Barnes, where Led Zeppelin had recorded, the Who had recorded, and the Rolling Stones. They did the soundtrack for fucking Star Wars in there. This was a lot bigger than my mum's front room, And also, we were working with professional producers and engineers and stuff, and so of course it was bound to be more polished than the first one. We still tried to make it as raw as possible, and because again, obviously, we were the ones doing all the shouting in the control room, going, no, dirty the guitars up a bit, make them louder, all that stuff. But yeah, I mean, and also, like I said, we were starting to play a bit better because when we recorded the first album, being in Stiff Little Fingers was pretty much our hobby. By the time we recorded the second one, it was our job. So, we'd started to tour consistently. I mean, when we did the TRB tour, that was the only real tour we'd ever done. Prior to that, we'd been doing the odd weekend here and there in Ireland, and that was it. So we were starting to get more hardened. And I think that shows with any band, as you go on, hopefully your playing gets better. Yeah, things move from there.
What were those early gigs like in Ireland when you first started out?
Um, they were a lot of fun. They were a lot of fun. I mean, they could be chaotic, but they were a lot of fun. I mean, it was fun. It was a hobby, and it was what we did for laughs. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the times, it could, like I said, it could be chaotic just simply because we didn't know what the hell we were doing, and the audience didn't really know what to expect. I mean, it was hard enough to get gigs as a band, as a rock band, much less as a punk rock band. And particularly if you then said you played original material, nobody wanted to know. Ireland was very, very strange at that period. I mean, because of the Troubles, very few bands would come across and play, either from England or Scotland or America or wherever. Excuse me. Generally, it was all homegrown, and the homegrown bands, the scene there was dominated by a thing they called the show band. And what a show band was usually about 6 or 7 musicians, maybe more if they had a horn section, if they were successful. And they were all incredibly talented musicians, but they were stifled by the fact that nobody wanted to hear them write their own songs. So what they would do, because the original bands wouldn't come across and play, as I said, from England or America, these guys had to learn the top 20 and just replicate it. They were kind of like human jukeboxes, but incredibly good at it. But of course, it stifled their creativity. And I'm sure, well, a lot of them got really good livings out of it, I'm sure that there was a huge amount of talent that was just washed down the drain because why bother writing songs when nobody wants to hear songs we write? So trying to get gigs is, like I said, was hard enough as a rock band because people wanted the show bands. So if you went in and said, oh, we're a band, what do you play? And even let's go back to that and say, oh, we play songs by Rory Gallagher and Thin Lizzy. They go, nah, not interested. If you're not going to play ABBA or whatever, we don't want to know. And then it was even worse if they said, what do you play? We said, oh, we play our own stuff. Forget it. You're not getting booked. So when we would go in and we'd say we're a band, they go, well, what sort of band? And we'd say a punk rock band. You got as far as punk rock and they throw you out the door. So it's all a bit chaotic. But I mean, a lot of fun, because of that, because you'd always get the hardcore who knew who you were, particularly after the first single came out and Peel was playing it. You could go to some far flung part of Ireland. I remember famously playing a town right in the middle of the country called Mullingar. It's a small town, very much a market town. And we played in a bar there. And because we were billed it was a three band. Was it a three-man package? No, I tell a lie. This was after Jim had joined. So it was just us. It was before the first record had come out. First album, had come out. So we'd done Suspect Device and Alternative Ulster at this point. And we basically played to like 5 men and a dog, seriously. I remember the most enthusiastic member of the audience up the front was this long-haired guy with a Jimi Hendrix T-shirt on, simply because there were loud guitars being played in his local bar. And that sticks in your memory because we got into an argument with the guy who owned the pub afterwards because he didn't want to pay us, or Jim had kicked the dressing room door open because long argument. Anyway, at the end of it, he basically threw us out and said, "You'll never play in Mullingar again." And to the guy's credit, he was right. We never fucking did. But I don't suppose Mullingar missed us, and sadly, we didn't miss Mullingar.
When did you realise you were building an audience then? Were there a point where you could say you had a following?
I think the Inflammable Material tour. We went down very, very well when we were opening for the TRB. We were getting very good reviews. So we kind of knew that we were picking up interest from people. But it was when we went out and did the Inflammable Material tour, and everywhere we went, the tour sold out. And obviously then, as we said, the album was a hit. That was when we knew that it was a serious thing. Of course, you still don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, it's a band, Bands famously last for, if you're lucky, 4 or 5 years, we honestly, you just took it for what it was and try and enjoy the ride. I even now looking back on it, I still don't know how the hell, this is our 40th year. I don't know how the heck we got to this point, because most bands that make it that far, and it's interesting that a lot of punk rock bands have done it without becoming the Rolling Stones or whatever, because those are the sort of bands you think of when you say, oh, you've done it for nearly 50 years, and those bands play football grounds. We don't play football grounds, the Damned don't play football grounds, Buzzcocks don't play football grounds, yet we've all been doing it for about the same length of time. In fact, the Damned Buzzcocks have been doing it longer. But yet we're all still playing the same sort of, mid-sized venues. And a lot of that, I think, is down to the fact that the audience have been incredibly loyal, which, again, is something you can't take for granted. And also, I think the fact that all the bands I mentioned still love doing it and are still enjoy getting up on a stage and playing. I mean, I think that, again, I'm not saying the Rolling Stones don't. I'm sure they do, because they absolutely don't need the money. So, they're obviously doing it just because they enjoy it, and why the fuck not? But I think it's a change in narrative, really, how music has changed. And again, the fact that I'm saying, we've done it for 48 years or whatever. I remember reading an interview with Jagger years and years and years ago. And I think he was probably in his 30s at the time. And they were already sort of saying, well, how much longer can you keep doing this, Mick? You know, you're running about like a teenager up there. And said, and he said, well, I don't know. And they said, well, you know, can you keep doing it till you're, I don't know, 50, 60? And he said, well, I don't see why not. Because, of course, their heroes were people like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, who did it until they dropped. You know, they did it till they were in their 70s or 80s. And he basically said, I don't see why we shouldn't. And they sort of laughed at him. He said, well, what's so funny? He said, well, we can't imagine a rock and roll singer doing it. They said, that's because the music's as old as I am. Nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. And I guess that was kind of a bit like that with punk rock, you know. I mean, I still find myself, funny enough, I was just having a walk yesterday and I ran into some guy. I've never met this guy before, but people around here, very friendly. So he just started, we were walking, just walking around. He started talking to me, asked what I did. And I told him. And he said, oh, what sort of band are you in? And I almost find myself apologizing. I'm going, well, it seems a bit ridiculous at 67, but I'm in a punk rock band. And it didn't seem ridiculous to him at all, because he was about the same age as me, maybe a little bit older. And he was like, well, because there were no restrictions. There's no sort of says you've got to retire at 65. There's nothing that says because nobody's done it to this age before. So who knows? I mean, Charlie Harper's fucking 80 for God's sake, and he's still doing it. And you've got to say it's because he loves it, and God bless him. You know. So who knows? You know, who knows how long you can keep doing it? That wasn't the question you asked, was it? But fuck it,
No, but it's like that is what punk is, isn't it? Like anybody can do it, no matter what age or sexuality.
Well, hopefully, yeah, hopefully, you know. I mean, I think as long as you can still play to you know a certain level, and that's one of the reasons why we've kind of cut back on the touring, which might sound counterintuitive a bit, but it's simply because we are all getting on a bit, and I think that you know we've got, and I think rightly, we've got a reputation for being a pretty good live band, and that's something I don't want to slip. And I don't want to be up there at, 75 years old or whatever, and, not able to perform to the level that we play at. No, I'd much rather we did 9 shows to that level rather than 30 shows at 50% of that level, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And that's actually the main reason that I asked the band to cut back, not because I don't feel we can't do it anymore, but simply because I feel we can do it, and I don't want to let that slip.
Yeah, definitely, I understand. With the whole punk scene, around the third album, I've heard you say before punk, and I've had guests on that have said around that time punk started to get silly, like with spiky coloured hair and piercings all on your face and stuff. Could you see the end of punk then when you went in for the third album?
Well, I mean, again, you could say you saw the writing on the wall before that almost. I mean, the two-tone guys had shown, there was other, if for want of a better term, working class music that was available, if you like, and I think that, yeah, I mean, I think the bands you're referring to kind of were more. They kind of impinged more on my consciousness maybe a year later. I mean, Go For It was 1981. I think it was probably about 82 when I became more aware of those younger bands with, like you said, sort of the more extreme fashion sense. But I never really concerned myself with what other bands were doing or what was going on. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I was writing songs for Stiff Little Fingers, and Stiff Little Fingers were whatever we wanted them to be. So while I said, earlier that there was a slight movement musically on Nobody's Heroes, I think we, without meaning to, we made a very definite. There was a definite sea change on Go For It when we just kind of threw off as many shackles as we could. I didn't want to make another Son of Inflammable Material. I wanted to be honest about what we were listening to and what we wanted to play. So I think that Go For It is a lot more varied in the approach. That we actually were trying to write songs in a reggae style. I mean, Henry's only one, my own, Safe as Houses. We were obviously we'd expanded the subject matter a lot. you look at that record. There's, like I said, those two tracks I just mentioned. There's a rockabilly type thing again with Henry's Gate 49. There's an instrumental. There's really a pure pop single in Just Fade Away. We brought in horns on something like Silver Lining, which was very much influenced by my love of early Motown records when I was growing up as a kid. And so we were pulling a lot more influences in and wearing them on our sleeve. And I think that's probably why, looking back on our career, of the first block of albums, that's why that one's my favorite, just because of that, because we started to spread our wings a bit there. And as a consequence of which, I mean, again, it got pretty good reviews, but the audience were very hesitant about it. And I think a lot of that was to do with what you've just said, because I think some of our audience were attracted by the rawness and the immediacy of Inflammable Material. And obviously the rough edges had been knocked off by ourselves. I mean, a lot of people were blaming the record label, but as I pointed out earlier, record label didn't really have anything to do with it. That was all completely down to us. And so I think when they heard those younger bands coming through who were going through their own immediate raw phase, that was the music they liked. So they gravitated towards them, and kind of left us alone. So it wasn't so much that I saw the writing on the wall at the end of punk, if you like. And also bear in mind at this time as well that the New Romantic thing had started. We were label mates with Spandau, who we got on with really well as guys. And I actually like a lot of their records. And actually live, they were a great band live. And people, never gave them the credit for that at the time. They just sort of saw them on Top of the Pops and immediately assumed, my kid's sister likes them. They can't be a real band live. They were a real band live. Trust me, they were really good. But, as far as I was concerned, it was all just music. And I think probably being on the inside of it rather than looking at it from the outside as a fan. I mean, I was still a fan, but on the inside, and because I knew these people. I mean, I mentioned the Specials as well. We were all on the same damn label. I mean, at that point, Chrysalis was a really hot label to be on. I mean, obviously, quite apart from ourselves. I mean, again, Go For It was still a top 20 record. I mentioned Spandau, I mentioned the Specials. Blondie weren't exactly sitting still and doing nothing. So Ultravox had just signed as well. Vienna had just become a big hit. So it was a really, well, I want to sound like a 60s hippie. It was a really cool record label to be on,
You mentioned Top of the Pops there. Is it right after your first appearance you were told you weren't going to go back on the show?
No, they never actually banned us. They did have strong words with us, but we were so fucking drunk we don't remember much of what they said. And I blame Phil Lynott. For that. Phil took us up to the BBC bar and got us hammered before we went on. But I mean, we were never taking it seriously anyway. I mean, the record company were very keen that you took it seriously. Our manager was keen we took it seriously, and we just thought the whole thing was a fucking circus. So, our miming appearances on Top of the Pops went from bad with the first one to just fucking ridiculous by the time we were. I mean, I remember we did. I'm trying to think whether it was. God, I can't remember. I think it might have been Fade Away, where Jim just got up and just played a boron all the way through it, which was pointless because I don't think there's a boron on it. There was another one where I think one of the At the Edges where he picked up the cymbal stand and played the guitar solo and stuff. So yeah, we weren't exactly putting ourselves forward as the next the next teen heartthrob. We've got to mime to this properly on Top of the Pops thing. Nah, we were never threatened with being banned from it. Like I said, they did pull us to one side and say, if you don't take this seriously, we're not going to use you. But nah. But
I guess I watched the first time you were on it, and you just started laughing like halfway through when you were singing. Is that like part of it?
Well, yeah. I mean, and again, they actually said to the producer said to our manager, said, you've got to tell him to stop looking at himself in the monitor because he's laughing. And our manager said, "Trust me, he can't see the monitors. Once he takes his glasses off, he can see fuck all." He said he's not looking at himself in the monitor and laughing. He's laughing because he knows what the fucking drummer's doing behind him. It's got nothing to do with the monitors, and that was actually true. We'd done a couple of run throughs, and I knew what Riley was up to behind me. So you know.
Did you enjoy playing on other TV shows, or is that not something you like doing?
Well, again, it was interesting back then because you know there were a couple of things we played on. I think the only studio live thing we did in the UK was we did a program called Something Else from Glasgow, where we actually got to play live in the studio, and that was, I mean, that was always my big problem with television and us. First of all, the sound was always terrible. I mean, it's not like today where you've got sound bars and people have hooked their TV up to their stereo. So it was a tiny little speaker about yay size, so it sounded like shite no matter where you were. But the two shows that the BBC had at the time, and there wasn't much in the way of competition from ITV. They might have had a few tea time kids shows, but they were very much kids shows. Was Top of the Pops and the Old Grey Whistle Test, and I actually had a conversation. Well, it was actually a debate on TV with this guy Robin Nash, who was the longtime producer of Top of the Pops. He was very staid. Old school BBC guy. He always wore a bow tie and stuff. He was very old school BBC. And I mean, he was just very patronizing and supercilious about the whole fucking thing. But I said to him, well, you know, you've got these two shows, and the show that's actually got an audience there, Top of the Pops, you don't let the bands play live. Yet the show that doesn't have an audience, the Old Grey Whistle Test, they do play live. Isn't that a bit ass about face? And he was just like, he just went off into some, you know, discourse about how Top of the Pops was just a marketing tool for record companies anyway, and you know they'd much rather that your bands presented in the best light, and that meant miming, and that was laughable as well, because you know you weren't miming to the record, you were miming to. Well, I tell a lie. You were supposed to be miming to a re-recording of the record. This was a rule put in place by the Musicians Union back in the days when most people that were on TV shows were solo singers. And it was designed to protect their members in so much as if Tom Jones was on singing his latest hit. He'd obviously used an orchestra on the record, and the Musicians Union said, no, you got another 3 hours in the studio to re-record that so that their members would get paid again, which, you know, that's fine. But that's not fine when it's just you're the four guys in the band, and it might have taken you. I mean, not in our case because we were a punk rock band, but I mean, I'm trying to think. Think of something like the Beatles or whatever, who would spend days, weeks, you know, getting a record right, and then being told you got 3 hours to do it again. Well, you can't do that. That's just nonsense. But the MU would send a guy down to the studio and watch you re-record the single. And most times what would happen would be, you know, you'd do a rough approximation of your single, and in the control room there'd be two tape decks set up, one of which actually had the single on it and the other had what you were recording at the time. And the engineer would flip between the two as they were listening to it. The guy from the Musicians Union wasn't paying attention anyway. 9 times out of 10, you'd take him over the pub and just give him the fucking single on a tape at the end of it, and that's what you mind to. But this was something the BBC were very hot on. And we turned up, when we released Nobody's Hero and Tin Soldiers as a double A side, we'd recorded Tin Soldiers to sing on Top of the Pops. And we did the whole pantomime with the Musicians Union. We swapped the tape. We gave him the single. Bear in mind, like I said, the BBC were very, very hot on this. You know, if you didn't do this, you weren't getting on the show. So we turned up on the afternoon of the taping, the early evening of the taping of Top of the Pops, and we mimed Tin Soldiers, and they went, stop, 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 stop. And they asked for a copy of the lyrics to be sent to the control room. So, you know, we sent them a copy of the lyrics up to the control room, and they came back down and said, no, you can't play that on the BBC. We said, well, why not? And they said, well, we've just read the lyrics and said, this will stop young people joining the armed forces. We went, that's the whole fucking point. That's the whole And but of course now they're taping the show and they're 3 minutes late. So they said, oh, your record's a double A side, isn't it? Well, we'll just play the other side. And we were like, but we can't go in and re-record it. They went, oh, that doesn't matter. So the whole thing just got pushed out. They just blew the whole thing out of the water simply because they didn't want us going on top of the pops and basically saying to the youth of the nation, if you join the army, you might get fucking killed. So,
Did you got a lot of backlash sometimes for some of the song lyrics and songs, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. A lot of that was, we probably should have made things a bit clearer. I think sometimes we were just probably being a bit too clever for our own good. It wasn't immediately obvious to people what we were actually singing about or where we were coming from. And, I still stand by all of those songs. I mean, we haven't put anything out that, I wouldn't stand behind today. We probably could have been a bit clearer at the time. Like I said, we were probably just being a bit too clever for our own good sometimes.
My favourite album, or one of my favourite, is the fourth album, Now Then. But that was like the end of the band, really, then, wasn't it?
The first time round, yeah. And I mean, that's that album. It's a dividing album. People either love it or they hate it. Now, I've yet to meet anybody who thinks it's okay. And I think I'm probably the only person who thinks it's okay. I think when it's good, it's very good. I mean, I think songs like Bits of Kids, for example, or Is That What You Fought the War For, are as good as anything we ever wrote or did. And even a song like Won't Be Told, which we just put back in the set this year.
I think that's one of the best songs.
Well, thank you. I mean, it's one that we've never played live, just because of the difficulty back then. The technology didn't really exist back then to swap between the acoustic guitars at the start and the main electric guitars, at least not that quickly. We've managed to get round that now, and we played it on the last tour, and and it went down really, really well, and it's a lot of fun to play. But again, at the time as well, I mean, you mentioned those younger bands who'd taken a big portion of our audience, and also by that stage, the new romantic thing had become huge, and synthesizer bands were kind of the in thing as well. And very famously, the Beatles were once turned down in 1962 because Decca Records thought the guitar groups were on the way out. But that's kind of what it felt like in 1982 as well. 20 years later, the circle had gone completely round, and so we kind of felt that while none of us could play synthesizers or whatever, it was like it kind of felt a bit like beating your head against a brick wall, and that added to internal problems. I mean, the other thing was as well, we formed the band when we were 18, 19 years old. And by this stage, we're now 23, 24. And you do a lot of growing up at that point. People that were your schoolmates, maybe you've drifted apart from, you don't see them that often. A lot of people have got married, got kids. And, that's a big period in anybody's life. And we were living out of each other's fucking pockets through all of it. And also, I mean, there's a great Lou Reed album title called Growing Up in Public. We'd kind of done a lot of that as well. And you also mentioned, we'd taken a fair amount of criticism and a fair amount of stick as well. And that's a lot to take on board when you're that young. So it was a lot of the cracks were beginning to show. And also people wanted to pull the band in different directions. The great thing about the first three albums was that we were all pulling in exactly the same direction. When we made Inflammable Material, it was because we were all big punk rock fans, and that kind of carried on into Nobody's Heroes. And with Go For It, everybody was behind that. We should spread out. It's the album that we collaborated most on. I think it's the only time Henry and I ever wrote a song, and that was the title track, the instrumental. Which is the only time we ever wrote one together. Otherwise, I would have ideas or he would have ideas, and we would both work with Gordon, but independently. Whereas with Now Then, I wanted to go further into the actual songwriting side of things rather than, build it around a groovy guitar riff or whatever. And, so I was pulling in that direction. Henry wanted to go back to basics and make almost a Ramones album. Dolph had just joined, and he brought a wealth of experience and stuff. And the thing that one of the main things that Dolph brought was he was a great harmony singer. And we hadn't really used harmonies. We'd tried on a couple of things, but we weren't great harmony singers within the band, whereas Dolph was. And that opened up a lot of possibilities as far as I was concerned with regards to songwriting. I mean, it's something that we do and have done a lot since we reformed. Is we've used a lot of harmonies on a lot of songs. And also, I mean, Henry as well, without wanting to lay the blame at anybody's door, he'd moved back to Ireland at that point and really didn't want to leave Ireland. I mean, he didn't like being in London, which was a bit of an obstacle because that's where we were recording the fucking album. And I remember when he came in to do his lyric on his vocal rather on I think it's Big City Night. He literally walked in with his suitcase and put it down beside the microphone and basically said, I hope this isn't going to take long. I'm on the 6:30 plane. So, like I said, we'd all kind of dropped the reins a bit. I was just as bad. I mean, the World Cup was going on at the time, and Northern Ireland were doing really well. And I spent more of my time watching the fucking football than I was in the next room when the guys were making our record in the studio. So it was not a fun time. The cracks were showing. We were arguing amongst ourselves, and it was kind of time to stop. Really.
It's 4 albums in 4 years as well. That's a lot, really. Did that play a part in it as well, the creative side?
It probably did, yeah. I mean, again, you don't really notice the pressure, but I was aware of it. I mean, it's one of the reasons actually we did the Listen EP, because at that point the label were pushing for another album, and I basically said to Gordon, I said, we haven't got the material for a fucking album. I said, how about an EP? And he went, oh yeah. And people don't make those anymore, do they? So that came about. So, at that point, if you stop and think of that, I mean, the 4 songs that were on that, if we'd stuck to our guns and said, we're not ready to make an album yet, and taken maybe 4 of the weaker songs off now then and put those 4 on, because I think that EP is very strong. I think that all 4 songs on that are really good. If we'd taken 4 of the weaker songs off now then and put those 4 in, I think it would have been a much, much stronger album. And that actually might have held the band together because, by that stage, if we put out a strong record, and if, say, Bits of Kids had been a hit, there probably would have been enough encouragement for us to keep going. But honestly and realistically, I think we needed to get the fuck away from each other for a while at that point, I remember Dolph saying to me, and bear in mind, Dolph had just joined the band, but I remember him saying to me, you should go and do a solo record. And I was like, what, you mean leave the band? He went, no, that's the point. Don't leave the band. Go do a solo. Just go away for a year and then we'll reconvene. But, that seemed like the sort of thing that American fucking superstars did. It wasn't the sort of thing, like I said earlier, 4 raggedy ass kids from Belfast did. So that just seemed a bit, that wasn't a possibility, really.
When the band got back together 5 years later, were you pissed when he decided to do it again?
No, I was pleased.
I was drunk, like pissed, drunk.
Oh, when we decided to do it. Oh, yeah. Well, what happened was I got a phone call from Ali, and I hadn't seen him since we split up. I mean, I may have run into him once or twice. I think I went to see, he was in a band called Friction Groove, and I went to see them once. But we never ran into one another socially. Anyway, he called me up, and it was around the time the bands that had split up seemed to be getting back together. I remember the Buzzcocks had just reformed and the Tom Robinson band had reformed. And that's why he was calling me. He said, look, TRB are doing a show. Do you want to come see him? And I had a big wheel gig that night. So I said, no, I can't. I'm actually working that night. But, it's great to hear from you. I haven't spoken to you in a long time. We should get together and have a beer. So we did. And we got mortal hammered, the pair of us. And as is always the way with these things, as you're getting hammered, I mentioned all these bands getting together, and we decided we were better than all of them. So why the fuck didn't we get back together? And so he was like, okay, well, I'll go call Dolph, you go call Henry. And I woke up the next morning with a pounding hangover, on the phone ringing, and it was Ali, and he said, "Okay, I spoke to Dolphin. He's in." I went, "He's in for what? What are you talking about?" And he said, "We're going to put the band together. Did call Henry, didn't you?" I went, "Did I? Fuck, I don't know." And yes, I had called Henry, and yeah, he was up for it. And so yeah, that was kind of how it all came back together again. And obviously, what happened was, well, we got a lot of negative feedback from a lot of people. It was like, you're wasting your time. And but the company who promoted the comeback tour, they originally booked us into small clubs because we just didn't think anybody would remember or even be interested. And of course, they realized very quickly that we had to go into theaters that in some cases were actually bigger than places we'd played when we were supposedly at our height. And everywhere sold out. I mean, Germany sold out, the UK sold out. It was phenomenal out of nowhere. And what was only supposed to be a get back together for just, for the fun of a quick run around the country and genuinely to have some money for Christmas so we could, go home, see our folks and buy some Christmas presents for them, turned into we all had to sit down at the end of that tour and go, we might be onto something here. Do we seriously want to do this? And if we are going to do it, can we actually be a bit more respectful to one another and not get on each other's nerves as much as we did the first time? And, a bit didn't quite work, but we managed to stick together. Well, I say managed to stick together. Obviously, people came, people went, and in Ali's case, he went and came back again. But
it's crazy how music works out, because like we were saying before, punk had kind of gone, like you said, this like new what's it called with Spandau Ballet and stuff. What's that genre?
Oh, the new romantic stuff.
New romantic stuff, yeah, that had come along and punk had kind of died down. And then you couldn't get back together and you're playing bigger shows than what you played in your peak. Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy that tour?
Very much, yeah. I mean, again, it was astonishing. It was very much like the first tour. It was very much like the Inflammable Material tour because everything was just such an eye opener, and the thing that blew me away and still blows me away to this day because it's still true is the amount of affection people had for the band. I mean, this wasn't just coming along because, they got back together, we should go and see them. I always liked that At the Edge single or whatever. There was a genuine outpouring of love when we played, and that still happens to this day. I mean, that is the thing that always amazes me about our audience is that they genuinely care. And again, I mentioned earlier about Alternative Ulster being the Alan Shearer on the bench. It's something that I've always thought about our audience is that they're not like your average music fans. It's much more like a football crowd. We're their team, and that's it through thick and thin, And I mean, they stick with us. I mean, we have people follow us, people that will do the entire tour, people that have travelled to Australia to see us play, that have travelled to America to see us play, and vice versa. I mean, people who come from Australia and come from America if we're playing. I mean, Glasgow Powerland is a case in point. And recently, over the last sort of 5-6 years, over the last 5-6 years, the homecoming shows at Custom House Square in Belfast have become a real focal point for people. And you get people from all walks of life coming to, but again, that Belfast show, particularly because it's bigger. I mean, you get 5,000 people in a square in Belfast. Sadly, a lot of the time in the rain, but they stay and they come from literally all around the world, and it's just wonderful. It's like a little stiff little fingers festival for the weekend in Belfast. It's great to see, and very, very, very humbling. But yeah, like I said, that's the one thing that's always struck me about our audience is just the sheer love they have for the band. I sometimes think way more than we have sometimes,
Well, you have a song called Nobody's Hero, but you must have had a lot of people coming up to you saying, like, you are a hero to the band, like you say.
Yeah, I mean, that still makes me slightly uncomfortable. I still find it difficult to use the word fans, even though I just did. That's why I keep saying our audience or whatever, because the fans just strikes me as, well, who the fuck would want to be a fan of me? I mean, have you seen me try to struggle to sort of do a load of laundry or something? Have you seen me try to struggle? Seen me try to struggle to paint the fucking spare room? It's like, no, nobody would be a fan of anything like that. But it's yeah, it is very, very humbling and very, and the trouble is, you start saying stuff like this, and people think you're just talking shite. People think you're blowing smoke up their ass. But it's yeah, I guess it is what it is. And yeah, I mean, yeah, the whole hero thing, I'm never ever comfortable with. But you know,
Is that what the song was about then? That you wasn't comfortable being a hero?
kinda. I mean, yeah, what it was about was, I mean, suddenly we, like, you mentioned we were on Top of the Pops and all that sort of carry on, and we'd signed to a major record label, and what we found was that guys who were our friends when we were growing up started to treat us differently. And we didn't feel that we had changed at all. And I still don't think we'd changed. I mean, obviously, our experience had changed, but as people, we hadn't changed. But our friends were treating us, not all of them, but some were treating us differently. And yes, so it was more a case of my sort of saying, look, I didn't fucking ask to be anybody's fucking hero here. And I don't want to be. I'm still the same guy I always was. And I used to always, I mean, it's a very glib way of putting it, but I used to say, you couldn't win no matter what you tried to do at that point. And it's changed now. But back then, if you did go back and meet a bunch of guys that you went to school with and you go for a beer, if because they'd seen you on Top of the Pops or whatever, if you didn't buy the first round, you were a tight bastard. And if you did buy the first round, you were just being a flash bastard. So you couldn't fucking win. And so that kind of informed the lyric behind Nobody's Hero.
Is that what it's kind of like? Like some people don't expect you to move out of Belfast and make a name for yourself. Is that what it's like in Belfast back then?
No, I mean, I think it's very much a UK and Irish thing. I think is the whole build them up, knock them down thing. Not again, like I said, not everybody, not by any stretch of the imagination is it everybody, but it's a strange thing. I think it might also be a working class thing, which is, the whole, don't get too big for your fucking boots, which is actually pretty good fucking advice. But equally, you shouldn't want to tear somebody down just because they've done well. I mean, there's enough to go round, really. And so I've always tried to be more sort of gracious about and going, well, good for him or good for her. Well done. It's a strange dichotomy, but yeah, I think it might just be human nature. Maybe not even just a UK and Irish thing. It might be human nature, really. I don't know.
Well, it's like the British press, they'll like support people, but then once they get to a certain thing, then they start turning on them. What was the
Yeah.
music press like with you?
They've actually been pretty fair. I mean, we got our own, we went through a bunch of those shit sort of, reviews and stuff. And actually, I think we dealt with it pretty well simply because, like you said, we were aware it was going to happen. I mean, I very much knew it was going to happen. I mean, even when we were touring with Tom, who up to that point had fantastic reviews. And I felt really bad about this. I remember sitting with him after a sound check one day, and he was reading whatever the music paper was. They used to come out every week, and he was being very nice about it because we were getting better reviews than they were, which was arrant nonsense. They were a million times better than us as a band. They were the ones putting bums on seats, not us. But because they, like you said, they'd been built up, and now it was time to knock them down. And we were being built up at their expense in this particular review. And he just looked at me, and he was kind of hurt, obviously, because I think he knew the guy who'd reviewed the show, and was like, I don't understand this. I thought this guy was a friend as well as whatever. And I said to him, but surely you must have known this was going to happen. It's like you just said, it's what they do. They build you up and then they knock you down. And he was genuinely hurt. I could, or at least I thought he was. And so I remember at the time thinking, this is going to happen to us. And so when it did, like I said, it was sometimes it was laughable because it was arrant nonsense. I remember famously one guy quoted an entire verse from a song and dismissed it at the end, going, "This is typical fucking hippie horse shit." And I agreed with him. We didn't fucking write it. He made up the fucking verse, said we'd written it, and then slagged it off. I mean, so some of it was pretty ham-fisted and laughable. And I tried not to let, if it was somebody I considered a friend, I tried not to let that upset me. equally, you also try not to get too friendly with journalists, you know.
So we mentioned you got back together. What's been your favourite album since you've been back since '82?
Undoubtedly the last one. But again, you know, you ask anybody in a band, what's your favorite song or whatever, they're going to go the last one I just wrote. So yeah, the great thing I think about No Going Back, well, a number of things. One, I think it's a very strong record. I don't think there's a weak song on it, and that was because we were able to take a lot of time putting it together. Again, I mentioned the love that the audience have for it. We did it as a crowdfunding thing, and surpassed the goal, I think, within like 2 days or 3 days. Again, which was just a demonstration of the love that the audience have for you, and also the confidence that they were showing in you, because they were basically buying a record that we hadn't even fucking recorded yet. And it was also nice from the point of view that it got us back into the chart again. I mean, it was, I think on the BBC had gone down the road that Billboard have been doing here in America for many years, where they split the chart up into, there's a rock chart, there's a R&B chart, there's a whatever, and the BBC had just started doing that. They still had a collected all together chart as well, and in the collected all together chart, I think it got to number 23 or something. But in the rock chart, it got a number 1, which was, you know, literally rocked everybody back on their heels. We were like, fuck me, you know, it's like with the best selling rock album in the country. So that was nice. But you know, leaving all that to one side, and also it got incredible reviews as well, which again, you know, I've just said, you know, don't really mean much. But it's nice to be validated. And I think in at least one magazine, it was made album of the year and stuff. So, you know, all of that is great. The reason I love it is, apart from all of that, though, is I think the songs are really fucking strong. I think the band played really, really well on it. It was an incredibly fun record to make. We did it all in a residential studio in Los Angeles, and I wasn't convinced that was going to work. We'd done residential studio albums before, and they can be a lot of fun, but they bring their own pressure as well, in so much as you're all in each other's pockets all the time. And I also wasn't 100% convinced about doing it in LA, just because that just sounded like such a fucking cliche, you know. And I thought, you know, so, you know, we started out as a punk rock band hating people like the Eagles, and now we've turned into the fucking Eagles. We're going to record an album in fucking Los Angeles, you know. It's like, but it turned out to be an incredible place to do it, mainly because you can't help but be relaxed there. And that really added to it, because it meant we didn't pressure one another, which I was surprised at. I thought we might have done, but no, it was a case of okay, he's going in to do bass overdubs now. We'll just go, you know, to do something else, and you know, it was a lot of fun to make that record, and I think we also, not since either Go For It or the first album, did we all know it was a good record. You know, we spent a week in a little rehearsal studio before we went into the recording studio, and we just basically ran through the songs over and over and over and over and over and over and over again with the guy who engineered it with us, so that when we did get into the actual recording studio, we weren't wasting any time. I think that's the death of many great albums, is you get in there and you're not 100% sure how it's going to turn out, and you can waste so much time, and everybody gets frustrated and bored. And luckily, from our point of view, that wasn't the case with this record. So there you go. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we will make at least one more album. We've got about 8 or 9 songs that I think are strong. So we'd probably just need another 3, 4. There are some ideas floating about. I would very much like to at least make one more. I mean, like I said, this is our 40th year of being a band. So, you know, in 2 years' time, you're looking at the 50th anniversary. That might be a nice time to call it a day. And it would be nice to bookend it with an album, if that's what we decide to do. We wait and see. Who knows? You know, you can come back to me in 2 years' time. I might be going, God, we're having so much fun. We're doing a world tour again. I doubt that bit. I really doubt that bit, but you never know.
It would be good to have another album, because it's been 10 years since that last one, Alex. So
Yeah, I know. And actually, that was really funny because when we did that last one, our manager said, it's been 10 years since the previous one. Let's not leave it 10 years to the next one. I went, oh, that won't happen. I think it's actually fucking 11 years, actually, no, but still.
It's
So I was right. It wasn't 10, it's 11 years now. So,
what so what are you writing about these days? If say like these new songs you're doing, obviously it's a long time since Inflammable
yeah.
Material and writing about Belfast.
Same thing. I
Like,
mean, same things. It's still things that are happening in my life. And admittedly, now, not so much immediate personal experience, but still things that make me angry. Still things that offend my sense of justice. And I mean, I can't. Well, I can go out on the street and protest, but people aren't going to pay much fucking attention to me. But if I write a song, I get to stand on a stage in front of a couple of thousand people and make my point. And I guess it's kind of a glorified standing on a soapbox on a street corner and shouting. It makes me feel better, and hopefully, it's written from a reasonably common sense point of view, so that a lot of people that hear it go, "That guy might have a point." That's the reason behind doing it. I still care about this stuff. It still makes me, angry. It still, like I said, offends my sense of justice. And if it's worth making a point, that's the best way I can make a point is write a fucking song about it.
I think that's why you've got a lot of loyalty as well, you and the band, because you can tell when you're performing these songs that they're real and they have meaning to you.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I mean, to use an old Bob Monkhouse joke, it's like, the key to all of this is sincerity. He said, once you can fake that, you've got it nailed. But I mean, it's that that's him being glib, but it's true. I mean, if you're sincere in what you do, I think the audience could. I think they can spot a fucking fraud a mile away. And I'd like to think that I can as well. There's been a bunch of acts that I've seen come up and get lauded, and I've just thought, no, these guys are fucking chancers. You can tell. And 9 times out of 10, I've been right, even if only in my own mind.
But then that's the longevity of the band now, isn't it? That's how you've kept the longevity with these fans. And I suppose you're seeing new fans as well at your shows and stuff.
Yeah, we are. We're getting entire families now, and I don't just mean mums, dads, and kids. I'm talking granddads and fucking grandsons and granddaughters coming, and it's wonderful, but it is a bit. It makes me feel old. That's about the only thing about my job that makes me feel old. Apart from that, it actually, it's pretty rejuvenating.
Well, you've got quite a few shows put up this year. You've got some festivals as well.
I mean, we did the March tour. Then I had to come back and have some surgery done, so I'm well on the road to recovery after that. So I think our next things are in June. We're doing a couple of things with the Sex Pistols in Europe. We got a few shows in the UK around that. Then back again in August. We're doing the Calvin Grove Bandstand in Glasgow. Obviously the Belfast, the Irish shows in Dublin and Belfast, and then we're doing some stuff in the US. Again, all of these are based around festivals or outdoor things or whatever, and that's kind of what the summer, is always like. The festival shows, I mean, the two Sex Pistols things are slightly different as much as they're very much punk rock festivals, and yeah, then all the other things are our own shows, So it's we are doing one in. We've got two so far confirmed in America. We're doing the one in Boston with our old pals, the Dropkicks, and that's pretty much. We've done a bunch of these that are like Irish festivals, and you get there and Bob Dylan's headline, and you're like, what with Bob O'Dylan these days, is he? But the one with the Dropkicks actually does seem to be an entire. Oh no, I tell you, the Hold Steady are playing as well. So yeah, there goes everybody's Irish, but there's a bunch of really good bands on that, and then we're doing going back to Chicago for me a couple of weeks after that and doing Riot Fest, and that's going to be fun as well, because obviously having lived there for 20 years, it's like everybody says, the hometown show's the one you get nervous about. I got 4 fucking hometowns now to play in, It's like,
Do you still get nervous going on stage, or is that long gone?
yeah,
Do you?
yeah, every time. And people have said this too, because I was like, I wish this would go away, because it's getting worse as we're getting older. I think because I know what can go wrong now. It's like I never got stage nervous when I was younger. And that's because, I didn't know what could go wrong. Now I know everything that can go wrong. But, a lot of people say that's probably because you care. And I think that's probably true, is because, again, these days, what with all the added fees and stuff on concert tickets, it's a pretty hefty investment on the part of an audience member to come see a band.
Yeah.
Particularly, as I mentioned, if they come with their whole family, and then they also buy a T-shirt on top of that or whatever. That's a subsequent, or sorry, that's a significant amount of money that those people have invested in you, and the very least you can do is make it worth their while. So I'm always aware of that as well, and it's not so much. I don't think the band will fuck up because we play to a reasonable level, but anything can go wrong technically, and so you're always concerned that I want to make sure that those people feel like they got a bang for their buck when they come see you.
Yeah, definitely. It's great that you're still going. Like I heard you say before, like when the band split, when the first split, you were thinking like it was going to be like the Jam, and that was it. You were never going to bother again with it.
Yeah.
But it's great that it's still going all this time. That you're still enjoying it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm still having fun, so there's no reason to stop unless my knees give out. So.
Well, when it is all said and done, how do you want Stiff Little Fingers to be remembered?
I haven't thought that. I think that's for other people to say, really, not so much me, because I'll go in, on the rocking chair on the porch with my own memories. So I know how I'll remember it. I hope fondly. I hope, I know that we've been a big part of a lot of people's lives, which is, that's quite a weight of responsibility to carry around with you. When people sort of come up to you and say, you've been the soundtrack of my life, that's incredible. That's mind blowing when you stop and think about it. I just hope that they have fond memories of it, because I think that's, it was supposed to be fun. I hope the audience had fun. I hope they continue to have fun. And also I hope that, at the end of the day, we give them pause to think about things. They may not agree with us, but at least if they stop and think about it rather than just blindly, going on. I don't care if somebody disagrees with me, as long as they take the time to stop and think.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a brilliant way to end it. But thank you for joining me. I know you don't like the word, but as a big fan of you and the band, it means a lot to get to speak to you. But thank you.
Thank you very much, Ethan. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and
No
I hope
problem.
all the shows go well in the summer as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, well, as long as particularly the outdoor ones, as long as the weather plays ball, I'm sure it'll be great.
Hopefully, we get a new album as well at some point. See what happens there.
Yeah. From your words to my manager's ears to yelling in my ears. Yes.
Thank you, Jay. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Take care. All the best.
Too.
Thanks, man.